Hello everyone, welcome to my kitchen. My name is Michael and today I've got a bunch of apples, and before they go bad I thought I would make some applesauce, and instead of cooking it on the stove like I normally do on my Dutch oven, I'm going to use my slow cooker today and put them in that. So let's get started. So I've already given my apples a good rinse here in the sink, and I've got about 10.5 pounds of apples that I've got here, and I've got varieties from Honey Crisp to some Yellow Delicious to some Granny Smith apples. I've got some Fuji apples in here. So if you just want to use just one particular kind that you've got, I just had a variety of ones here, and before they go bad, I thought I would make applesauce out of them. And a special bonus in this video today, I'm going to show you how to can them. That way you'll have them for the future. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll get started. And what we need to do with these after we've given them a good wash is we're going to peel them and we're going to core them. I do not have a food mill. If you've got a food mill, then you can skip this step because the food mill will leave the skins and the core behind, but I don't have one. So I'm going to be using a knife today. I've got a potato peeler here that I can use. I've got another potato peeler, and I've got an apple core. So if you don't have any of these things other than a knife, you're set to go. So what we're going to do with this apple core is, I'll show you how this works. This is really nice. You just take it and kind of center it in the top where the stem is, and the whole core of the apple will come out, and you're left with that. So then you just take your knife, if you want to use your knife, and we're just going to go around and we're going to peel our apple. All right, now that we've got our apple peeled, I'm going to set this aside. I'm going to grab me a bowl when I get ready to start working on the other ones and put on my skins and core in them. So I've got my slow cooker here and it is off. I'm going to go ahead and put some water in this and put a juice of 1 lemon in it. And the reason I'm going to do that is because if you know, like potatoes, if you start cutting on apples, the oxygen in the air will start turning them brown. So we definitely don't want that to happen. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with your apples. Now the smaller you cut them, the faster they'll break down and they'll cook faster. But you can definitely just quarter them and leave them in big pieces. That's fine too. But I'm just going to kind of cut mine down into little pieces like that. All right, you can see there I've just got some nice pieces that are about the same size. That way they'll break down a little bit easier. Now one thing about it is, depending on what type of apple you use, you can use anything that you want. Like I said earlier, if you want to use all of one kind, you can. If you've got a tree in your yard and you want to pull those out, definitely you can use those. If you go to the farmer's market, you can pick up a bushel or how many ever you got. Like I said, this is 10 pounds, and we'll see how many jars I get out of this at the end there, and that way you can kind of gauge what you're looking at. So I'm going to go ahead and put some water with some lemon juice in here and let that sit in there while I work on the rest of these apples. And if you've got one of those fancy apple peelers that you want to crank and it cuts it, you can definitely use that. I don't have one of those either. But definitely I'll get this done and I'll be back and we'll move on to our next step. I wanted to show you what this potato peeler is doing. It is, if you want to see, if you've got one of these, you can definitely cut that up a little bit faster than you are with a knife. If you've got good knife skills, and you might be able to beat this, but this potato peeler does the trick on this also. And with using this, you don't waste a lot of the apple because, as you can see here on my skin, there's not a lot of it left behind. I wanted to show you this one as I was working on these. There's some bruises on these, and you don't want that in your applesauce. So just take your paring knife and just kind of come in there behind it and just cut those bad spots off of it. Just like that. Clean it up. All right, I am back and I've got all of my apples peeled and cut up, and they are here in my slow cooker, and these are the skins that were left over from it. So you can do with those what you want. If you've got a compost pile, you can definitely put that in there if you're saving those. But I'm gonna go to the sink now and I'm gonna dump out this water, and you don't have to rinse the apples because that little bit of lemon that's in there is not gonna impose any taste on it. It really did help keep everything from turning brown, that citric acid and that lemon juice. So I'm going to go to the sink and I'm going to drain this and I'll be right back. I'm back and we're ready to go now. So I did just put the lid on the top of it when I drained it and just poured it over and drained it through this little side slit here, so I wouldn't have to lose any of my apples down the drain. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to turn this on, and I'm going to put this on low, and I'm going to let it get a start. And on about high, what I've done in the past with it, if you cook it on high, it's about 4 hours, and low is about 6 hours. So I'll be coming back and show you what we're looking at, the consistency when you know that it's done. It might not take that long because depending on your apples that you've got, They could break down in a couple hours or 3 hours, just depends on what type of apples you have and how old they are, how fresh they are. And so I've got just a variety here of mine, so we'll see how these break down, and we'll come back and I'll show you what that looks like. You're probably asking me, isn't this a lot of trouble to go through to make that? But when you look at the labels on some of the applesauces in the store, and you see a lot of them with that high fructose corn syrup, or you see some with preservatives and things in them, you know, when you're making it at home, you've got control over what you put in it. And if you've got nice apples that are, you know, organic, if you like that type of food, you definitely will know what you're getting with those. If you've got an apple tree in your backyard and you know you've not sprayed it, then you know you've got some really good apples with that. So, all right, now that I've got this started, I'll come back and let you see how it is working and show you what I'm going to do, the processes to get this finished out. I am back and my apples are done now. I wanted to show you what they look like and what happened over the last few hours. So I originally set these on low, and the timer started out at 6 hours is where it started to cook. At about an hour, I came back and just stirred it around with the spatula just to make sure that I was getting everything on the bottom to the top to get it good and started cooking. About another hour into it, I came back and did the same thing. And then I let it set for 2 hours. I didn't touch it. So then I come back after the 4th hour and looked at it and decided to turn it up on high. And when I did that, that's when it took off. You can really see here that my apples have really broken down, and you might like, you know, a little bit of chunks in your applesauce, and that's okay because that's why we're making it at home. You make it the way you like it. This is pretty good the way that it is right here. So what we want to do now is you want to give it a taste test, and you want to see where you're at with it. A lot of the applesauces and things, if you're used to getting them in the stores, have sugar in them, high fructose corn syrup. If you like a sweeter applesauce, then definitely at this point start adding some sugar. I'm not going to give you a recipe for that because that's up to every individual's taste of how they want to do it, how many apples you make. You know, you might only cook maybe 5 or 6 apples, where I cooked 10 pounds of apples here, or you might have a bushel of apples. It just all depends on how much you're cooking, to what your taste level is and what you like. I like mine unsweet. One thing I don't want in like applesauce and stuff like that in foods is a lot of sugar. So I've cut back on a lot of that, but you can definitely put as much sugar or as little sugar as you like. So if you use the Honeycrisp apples or the Fuji apples or the Ambrosia apples, those are going to be really sweet anyway, compared to a Granny Smith apple, which would be more on the tart side. So depending again what kind of apples you got, you want to taste it before you put any sugar in it and see what you like. Now if you like the applesauce in the stores that has cinnamon in it, you can definitely add cinnamon now. You might want to start out with a teaspoon. Give it a taste, see if you like it, and if it needs a little bit more, then just keep adding what you like. But just kind of let it sit between times, because while it's hot, it's going to be absorbing those flavors in, and you might get too much in there if you start just adding a lot into it to begin with, because as food settles, as you know, the longer it sits, it develops a lot of different flavors and things of what you're putting into it. If you like nutmeg in it, you can definitely grate you up some nutmeg if you like that. So it's just whatever you want to do with it. If you like it plain just like this is how I'm going to make it, then you're going to stop right here and let it cool down. Put it in some jars. If you want to put it in your jars while it's warm like this, then definitely warm the jars up, because you don't want to put hot food in cold jars, because you could risk the chance of the jar cracking or breaking on you. So if you're going to put it in there while it's warm, then definitely warm your jars up so that you've got warm food going in warm jars. That's the same process that we do when we're canning. And that's why we put our jars in water to warm them up, so that when we get back to put our hot food in, the jars are hot and they're not, you're not mixing hot food into cold jars and taking that chance of breaking it. So at this point, if you don't want to process them and can them, this is a lot of applesauce for me to try to eat, so I'm going to go ahead and process these, and I'm going to show you how to do it, because it is really easy to do. If you've seen some of my other videos on how to process food, it's basically the same. We're going to water bath can them today, and we're going to put them in our jars and process them. So I think I'm going to put mine a little bit smoother. As you can see here, I've got a few chunks in it, and I've got a couple of tools here that we can use for that. if you remember seeing my other video, I've got this other tool that I've got, and you can use that to break it up. And about 1 to 2 hours of cooking, you can take something like that, a potato masher, and do that. Mine has got a non-stick surface in it, so I was using some type of silicone or fiber based product that wasn't going to scratch this unit that I got up here. But if you've got a traditional crock pot which has a glass bowl or ceramic bowl in it, then you can definitely do something different. But just be really careful with it, because you don't want to break that with putting in some type of utensil in it that might break that up. So even if you've got a glass one, you might want to consider using some type of rubber or silicone based product to do that. Another tool that I've got here is I've got an immersion blender. If you've got an immersion blender, you can use one of these. I've got another immersion blender that's a little bit older than this one that has a plastic base on it. With this being non-stick, I don't want to put this metal against that because I might risk the chance of scratching up the bottom of it, so I don't want to do that. But I've got a food processor and I've got a blender which does the same thing. So I've let this cool down just a little bit before I start processing it, and I'm going to go ahead and move to my jars and get those ready for my canning process. I'm going to set this to the side and let this cool down just a little bit more before I put it in my food processor, and I'm going to go ahead and get my canning apparatus set up, and I'm going to show you now from this point forward how to process, hot bath your applesauce to make it shelf stable, and you've got it whenever you need it. So if you go out into the fall and you pick a bunch of apples, you can come back, make your applesauce, and then you can process them. If you've got some in your backyard, like my Granny Smith apple tree that I've got in my backyard has been dropping apples for the past couple of weeks now. So definitely, if you've got a source that are coming in now and you've got too many to eat, this is the way that you can preserve them for the winter, and you've got them for you and your family for the rest of the year until they start coming in again. So let me set this to the side, and I'll show you now how to water bath can our applesauce. So I've got my applesauce sitting to the side there, cooling down just a little bit. I want that to cool down before I put it into my food processor, and that'll give me an opportunity to get my jars started heating up, because this takes a little while for this to heat up. And that way, when I get ready to process my applesauce, it'll be ready to go. As soon as I pull out of that, the jars will be warm, and then everything will be ready to go to start canning. So what I've got here is I've got a water bath canner, and I'm just going to remove the lid on it. And make sure that yours has a tray. You can use a stainless steel pot if you want to, or if you've got a stock pot, you can use that. But you definitely want to make sure that you've got some type of rack on the bottom of it. Or if you don't have a rack, I'll show you a little hack. What you can do is you can take some of your old lids that you've got, and you can actually tie them together. You can use a wire, or you can use those plastic ties or the little garbage twist ties. And what you want to do is just build you up enough of these tied at the bottom that you can put this on the bottom. What you're looking for is just a little bit of a barrier between the bottom of the pot and where your jars are sitting, because once they start bubbling in that water, once they start the water starts boiling, you don't want to have a chance of them tipping over or breaking as they're banging against the bottom of that. So you can do that with this. You don't have to have one of these. If you don't have one, you don't have to go out and buy one, but you can make one with your stock pot and just use some of these ring lids that you've got, tie them together, put them in the bottom of your pot, and that just creates a barrier that this rack does the same thing for. So I've got, mine has a rack in it, and what I'm going to do is I've got several of my jars here that I've washed. So you can run them through the dishwasher, or you can wash them by hand in hot water. Just make sure they're nice and clean. And what we're going to do is I'm going to take them and put them right side up, set them down into my water bath canner. And at this point, when we get ready to can, we want the water to be 1 to 2 inches above the top of the jar sitting in the water. So what I do is I take water and I fill up each one of the jars while it's sitting in the canner, and that way it weighs the jars down, and then I'll come back with water and just fill the container up. And that way the jars aren't floating around banging each other, and I take an opportunity for them to break. So I've got 6 jars here. I've got 4 more that I've got washed and setting aside just in case I might need some more with my applesauce, but we're going to start with 6. But I've got more jars ready to go just in case I need some more. So I'm going to go ahead and start filling up my jars and fill my water bath canner up, and then I'm going to take it to the stove and turn it on. And I want the temperature to come up to about 180 degrees. I don't want it boiling, and that way the water will be ready to go. Once you get your jars filled up, it'll still be fairly warm. Then once you put your jars back in, it won't take too much longer before it starts boiling. So I'm going to go ahead to the stove, fill my jars up with water, fill the pot up with water so that it's 2 inches above the top of the jars, and then I'll be back and we'll start processing our applesauce so that we can get ready to start canning. All right, I've got my jars on the stove and I've got another little pot here that I want to put my lids in. And what I'm going to do with those is just drop those in. These are clean. I did wash these as well. I'm not going to put the rings in them. There's no need to put the rings in with this. And I'm going to go ahead and set these on the stove also. And we don't want to boil the lids. We just want to bring them up just a little bit above room temperature. But I'm going to go ahead and set them on the stove. I'm not going to turn them on yet because I'm going to wait till everything gets ready to go, and then I'll turn these on just a few minutes before, and that way that water will come up just a little bit above room temperature, and so those will be ready to go on top of my jars. All right, so now we got our lids on the stove and they're just sitting there. We've got our other supplies that we'll need for our canning. We've got our jar lifter. We definitely want something that's got some type of grip on it. You do not want to use tongs. You risk the chance of the tongs slipping and breaking, and definitely don't want that. So get something that's got some nice rubber grips on it when you pick up the jars. They'll stay with it. So then we've got our ladle. We've got here, this is a nice one that I've got. I'll put the link in the description box for all of these things there for those. And then I've got a magnetic lifter. This is for the jar lifter so that when you get ready to go, you just pick your lids up with the magnet and it pulls them right out of the water. You don't have to touch them. Keeps everything nice and clean. Then I've got a debubbler here. We'll use this side to make sure we don't have any air pockets in our jars. And then this side here, we can use to measure the headspace that we'll be using for our jars. All right, so we've got everything ready to go. Let's go ahead and start moving our applesauce into our food processor here. It's not going to take much to do that because this is broken down so well, just from looking at it. It ain't going to take much in this to be able to get it down to where you would see it in the store. So might just do half of it, and then we will take a look at it and see if I need to do any more of it. A couple of pulses like that is all you need, and I'll show you what that looks like here compared to what it looked like before. So this is what I had before, and now this is what I've got here with that. So if you want it to this consistency here, you can definitely put it in the food processor. It did take more than 3 or 4 little pulses to get it to where it was because of how it's broken down so far. I'm going to transfer this to this metal bowl here. I'm going to keep doing this until I get as much of this applesauce that I wanted to that consistency. So I'll be back in just a few minutes. I want to show you another little trick with these food processors. You can actually stick your finger right here in the bottom of this, and you can hold that plastic blade in with your finger from the bottom. I didn't know if you knew that or not. All right, I've got about an inch or 2 in the bottom of this left that's still that same original consistency, and I think I'm going to leave that where it is. And now I'm going to put this original mixture back in there and just kind of mix it together. So you can see what that food processor did with that. It did a really nice job of getting that down with just a couple of pulses on that. So I'm going to go over here and grab a spatula and make sure we get all of that out of this container because we want every bit of that. I don't want any of it to go to waste. All right, and now I'm just going to kind of mix this together with my ladle here. And you can see my consistency that I got here. I've got a nice mixture of both. I've got still just a few chunks in it, which will be nice to bite into that. And then I've got some of it that's really smooth. So it's up to you if you want to make it a little bit smoother. If you like a few chunks in it, you can definitely do that. Again, this is your recipe and you're making it how you like it. So at this point, instead of canning it, if you just want to, if you made a small batch, you want to put it in the refrigerator, definitely just put it in your jars. Like I said, either wait till it cools down or heat you up a couple of jars until you put it, you want to put the warm food in with the warm jars. Now this will only last in your refrigerator for probably about a week, depending on how old your apples were when you started. So definitely by canning them, then you've got the shelf stability to last longer for that, and you can come back and eat these anytime you want to. So if you just made a small batch and you want them just for a couple of days, then definitely just put them in the jar, put them in the refrigerator, and you or your family can eat on them and have a nice snack for the week on those. So I'm going to wait for my jars to heat up. I'm going to go ahead and put a little rinse on these things and get everything else out of the way here so we can get ready to start water bath canning. All right, so I just pulled one of my jars out of my canner. We're ready to go now. And so with this recipe, because apples are a acidic food, we're not going to do anything with them other than water bath canning. You don't need to pressure can these because they do have a higher acidity to them. which makes them great candidate for water bath canning. And I did use an apple as a substitute for pectin in my strawberry jam that I did earlier. So if you haven't checked out that video, I'll put that link in that description box. Those are really good, how those turned out. So what we're looking for now with this is we want a 1/2 inch headspace from where the food is to the top of the jar. Now with this debubbler, it's got some markings here on the side. It's got 1/4, 1/2, 3/4 of an inch. And then you can just kind of go down and you can tell by looking at it if the food is at the bottom of this, at the top of where this 1/2 inch is here, and that'll give you a 1/2 inch headspace. If you've got one of these funnels, this funnel here does the same thing. It's got 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, all the way down to an inch. So we can use either one of those that we've got. So just be really careful because your jars are hot. And we're going to fill up our jars with our applesauce. And what we're looking for again is that 1/2 inch. So let's measure it and see what we got. So we've got what looks like to be a 1/2 inch where my food is at. But that could be deceiving because you might have an air pocket in it. And you always want to make sure that when you are canning that you debubble whatever it is you're canning, because you don't want any air pockets in there, because what would happen is when you start the canning process, the bubble comes to the top, your food goes down, and you don't have the proper height of where your food is to what's recommended by the recipe. So just stick the other end of your tool down into it and see what you've got. That is a 1/2 inch. So now I'm going to take a paper towel, and I've got some white vinegar here, and I want to make sure that I get a good seal from my lids. So I'm just going to take the paper towel here and just kind of run around the top of it just to make sure that I don't have any of that sticky applesauce on the top of my jar. And this is another opportunity for you to check just to make sure that you don't have any cracks or anything in your jars that's going to prevent your lid from sealing. So that's pretty good right there. So then we will take our magnetic tool here, and I've got my lids just heated up just a little bit, and I'm going to center that on the top. I'm going to take my ring, and we want these fingertip tight. So what that means is once it stops like that, you want to grab something, make sure you've got something that's covered, and you just want to, that's fingertip tight. Now at this point, it's ready to go back into the canner, and we'll go get another jar, and we'll do the same process. All right, I'm going to do one more for you, and then I'll continue to do the rest of them off camera. Fill up your jar, looking for that 1/2 inch headspace at the top. Take your debubbler and make sure you get all the air out of it. Take your paper towel, I got me a fresh one, go around the top of your jar to clean off anything that might be on the top that would prevent you from getting a good seal with that lid. Take your magnetic tool, grab your lid, center it on the jar, grab your ring. When it stops, fingertip tight. Back in the canner it goes. I'll be back and I'll tell you how many I get. Okay, I am back and I've got all of my applesauce in my jars. I did need another one, so I did heat up another jar and got it ready to go. And I want to show you what I got left out of this. So as you can see here, I don't have much left out of it. So out of the 10.5 pounds of apples that I started out with, which was probably a little less than 10 pounds once I got the cores and the skins off of them. So just kind of right around 10 pounds gave me 7 pint jars of applesauce plus what a little bit that I've got here. So I'm going to give this a try. I've got me a clean spoon here. That is delicious. Didn't need any sugar because, like I said, I had half of the mixture that I had was Honeycrisp and Fuji's and a couple of Galas in there. So I've got just a little bit here. I'm going to scoop this out and I'm going to eat this tonight. While I'm waiting for my jars to start boiling, I wanted to talk about why we only went with fingertip tight on our jars. So with that 1/2 inch headspace at the top, what's going to happen is once you put them in the water bath canner and it starts boiling, it starts pulling that, creating that vacuum in the middle. That's what we want to be able to keep our food good, because as we know from earlier when I was peeling my apples, that I put water and lemon juice in there to keep them from turning brown. It's the same thing with food. If you leave the air in the jar, is going to cause your food to spoil, and we definitely don't want that. So what it does is it pulls that air out through the sides. It's not compressed down really tight on it, and it will pull all that air out of it. Once you pull it out of the water after it has done its processing, then it will seal down on the top of it. So we're going to continue to talk about this in a minute. I am waiting for my water now to come to a rolling boil before I start my timer. Rolling boil, that's not where you just start seeing a few bubbles in it. You want it rolling boil, where it's going. So then once you hit rolling boil, 20 minutes. I've got the lid on it now, wait for that to come up. Once your timer goes off at 20 minutes, you turn off the heat, take off the lid, let the jars sit in the water so that the boiling will kind of cool down a little bit, and you'll be able to pull your jars out. And in that 5 minutes, you might see a few more bubbles coming out of your jars too while they're just sitting in there. So 20 minutes processing time, rolling boil, turn off the heat, remove the lid, let them sit in the water for another 5 minutes, and take them out, and we'll continue in just a minute. I'll be right back. All right, I am back, and my applesauce is ready to go. So I'm going to talk a few things about the canning process that I didn't mention earlier. So with the lids, you want to make sure you use brand new lids every time. You do not want to reuse your lids. So once you open the seal on these and you eat the food out of them, throw the lid away. You can keep the ring if it's in good shape. If it doesn't have any dents in it or doesn't have any rust on it, then you can definitely use that again. But I don't use them again if they've got dents or rust on them. That's just something, they're relatively cheap, and I don't want to take a chance on it ruining my food after you've worked hard to get it to where it's at. So like I say, with this recipe today, you can do so much to it. You can add sugar if you want to. You can leave it out just like I did. If you wanted to add some cinnamon, you could. Nutmeg, it's completely up to you what you want to do with it. So now that we've got our applesauce here, we're going to let it rest on the counter or wherever you want to put it. You need to put it away from prying hands and things, because these jars are really hot, and you want to make sure that nobody gets hurt while these are cooling down. So you want these to rest somewhere for 24 hours, and then we're going to come in and test them. So what you do at that point is the rings will be loose once they cool off, and you just remove the ring, check the seal on the lid to make sure that it is sealed, and it is safe to go on the can shelf at that point. You want to leave the rings off of it. You do not want to put the rings back on it when you store it, because you could get a false seal just by chance. If some reason the lid on the jar, the seal might come loose on it. If you still had the ring on the outside of it, it might reattach it again, and you've let air into your food. And like I said earlier, air is the enemy to your food. It will cause it to ruin, and you don't want to see spoiled food or not be aware that it was open at one point and resealed again. So you definitely store your product on your shelf without the rings on it. Now for your canning times, what I wanted to mention to you earlier is the processing time that I gave you for these pint jars was 20 minutes. And that is for where I live. You want to find out what your altitude is where you are, and you want to base that on your processing time. So I based my time, I live at an altitude that's 1,000 feet or below, and so that's the time of 20 minutes. So if you need a different, if you're at a different altitude, then you might find out that your processing time is different. So in the description box, I'll leave the where you can find the altitudes and the processing time for where your altitude is. I'll put that in there. The USDA has a great website where you can go and check out processing times and things. So if you're watching this in the future, you might want to check to make sure that everything's still the same. I doubt that's going to change, but you never know, it could. So I'll leave the times, the processing times for the different altitudes of where you might be. When you're removing your jars from the canner, just lift them straight up and make sure you've got a good tool to be able to do that with. You don't need to be shaking it around, because you want your food to get acclimated to where it is. And if that might not be sealed down yet, you definitely don't want to disturb that seal. So if there's any water on the top of it, these jars come out of that water and they were boiling. So it just a few minutes, the water will be going off the top of it. So you don't really have to do anything with them. And you want to make sure that, that everything gets a good seal on it. So after they've sat on your counter for 24 hours, you come in, like I said earlier, remove the rings to check to make sure you've got a good seal. If you find one that's not sealed, put the ring back on it, put it in the refrigerator, and you can eat it right then. So every once in a while you might find one that doesn't seal, and that's not a problem. So I hope this has inspired you to try to make applesauce. And if you don't do the canning process and you make a small batch, it is really easy to make in the slow cooker versus putting it on the stove. It takes about 35 minutes on the stove to cook it, but you got to keep stirring it, and you keep a check on the temperature because you don't want it to burn and stick. But in the crock pot, if you've got a crock pot, let the crock pot do the work for you. It might not be as fast, but you don't have to stand there and stir it, and you just come back and check on it on occasion to see how you got, and you come up with wonderful applesauce just like I've got here. So I hope this has inspired you to try some applesauce, and if you like this content, maybe you might consider giving me a thumbs up. I would really appreciate it. And check out one of these other 2 videos over here. You might find something else you like. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I can't wait to hear from you in the comments how your applesauce turns out. Leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Bye-bye now. That is delicious. See ya.